Alright. Coming back at it. Yeah, so anybody that doesn't know, although I talked about it in the Discord, I recorded this last night and the audio was kind of shot. So I decided to re-record it this morning before I go out and do stuff for the night. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. So I wanted to just cover everything again. We got 8 lists on the docket today. And a bit of a disclaimer before I start. These are lists that are a majority untested. I made sure to check the mana bases, make sure they flow well, did a couple test hands, ran a couple like goldfish games. I did a little bit of number crunching. I just wanted to make sure the numbers lined up, but I have not taken these into, say, a GP League match. They're not deck lists you're seeing in Revolution deck lists. These are entirely new brews to the format. So I wanted to get that out of the way first and foremost. I just wanted to get people's, brain juices flowing in case they see stuff that they might like. If there's a game plan you like, feel free to take one of these. I will try to put a link to the deck lists in the description when I post the YouTube video for this later. And yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at. So I guess without further ado, we'll just start on deck number 1. Also, I forgot to turn off my phone. Let me do that. So, deck number 1. I call it the Green-White Shifting Progress deck. Axiomatic Shift is a card that people ask me to brew with, and it's a card that I've also seen a bit of buzz around. It lets you toolbox out pieces by spending counters as if they were mana, X green and a white, search your library for a creature with mana value X or less. It's pretty simple, it's very neat, and I decided to go for a green-white plan with it, kind of like a green-white beatdown plan with it. Normally, Bant is kind of like the counters colors. It's what was pushed in Clicks of Nylin. People have fun cards like Absorb Painter and stuff like that from blue that they like, but I wanted to go for a more beat-down kind of aggressive package with cards like Seeker of New Horizon and Skitter Tiller, and just really hone in on having some consistent early plays. Something really nice with this deck is that off of Axiomatic Shift, you have a small toolbox element, if you can't see like all these singletons. You have a Club Promoter, which destroys artifacts and enchantments. It's a great tutor target into some matchups. So however, the New World gets you go wide, and it protects you from board wipes in a sense, because when each of the tokens dies, they draw you a card. Chosen of Heliod punches holes in people. He gives pro creatures and +1/+1 to something. He threatens to keep doing so if he sticks around for any amount of time. He's just a very powerful card. And then Indomitable Jikru. And Jikru is a card that I really like in these more toolbox lists, because dropping a Jikru into some boards or some decks is just backbreaking. It gains you 5 life, it draws a card, it's a 3/6 vigilance. A lot of decks can't kill it on size, like work safety violations or any Kudiata technically can, but it's kind of an uphill battle. Like, there's not a lot of ways for people in format to deal with Jikru, and the 5 life stabilizing versus aggressive decks is very good. On top of that, there is a singleton Army of Tracks. I'll go ahead and pull that up real quick, but Army of Tracks is a 7 mana flood the board with stats card. Oh yeah, I was searching up some cards before we played, before I did this. But Army of Tracks, 7 mana, 1/1 Flying Vigilance. When it enters, create a number of army tokens equal to your devotion to white, and then put that many counters on each army you control. So, on its own, with no other white cards on the field, it is 7 mana for 3/3/3s, one of which has Flying and Vigilance, so it's 9/9 in stats, which is not bad. Where it gets really silly is when you start hitting these devotion numbers. Like, Chosen of Heliod is 3 devotion on its own, so if you just go like Chosen of Heliod into Army of Tracks, you're now getting 5/5/5s. That's 25/25 in stats, which is kind of insane. And on like the more tame end, like Overbearing Researcher likely sticks around unless you get wiped, and that's has a white pip on it. Distributive Justice is in deck that has a white pip on it. Getaway Proxies in deck, and it's also Flash that has a white pip on it. There's ways to get Army of Tracks to be like 4/4/4s, 5/5/5s, um, stuff like that. Also, I actually was kind of wrong for Army of Tracks. Sorry. The army itself will be a 3/3 and it'll make 2/2/2s at base. So it's not as good as I thought. That's my bad. It would be more of 7/7 in stats for 7. But either way, it's just an option for you to cheat in with Axiomatic Shift to basically go answer my board or die. And I really like that as an option. There's one other card you could be using instead of Army of Tracks, and Enduring Genteel. I decided to not go for it since this deck's already aiming to go tall most of the time, and I'll show you some of the combos for that. But Enduring Genteel is just a massive dude. The token it makes draws you cards, so if they remove Genteel, you still get to keep drawing cards, gain a little token life. If it sticks around, you can like start doing things. There's some interesting things Genteel does. I preferred Army because just because the deck aims to go tall, so having another go wide option that just like goes very wide and big at the same time can be problematic. And like if Army is not good in a situation, Survivors likely is, Chosen likely is, Jicker likely is. Like it's more just an option. Like that's what Toolbox is at the end of the day. But you could totally go for like Enduring Genteel over Army if you're feeling like it. There's some fun things in this deck that I really like. So, Seeker of New Horizons, you're on mostly basics. Like you have a ton of basics here, ways to fetch out basics, and Seeker just grows as a 1-drop really tall. And on top of that, with Overbearing Researcher, Researcher gives ward based on the number of counters on a creature. So if you drop Overbearing Researcher after a Seeker of New Horizons, you can give it ward 2, and that basically shuts down all removal attempts. And once it gets up to like a 4/4 in stats, it starts becoming too problematic for most removal in the format that isn't Let Them Eat Cake. On top of that, I really like how Overbearing Researcher and Skitter Tiller combo as well. If you go turn 2 Skitter Tiller into an Overbearing Researcher, you grow the Skitter Tiller into a 3/3, so it likely tramples over more things, which is really nice. And then that grows it again to be a 4/4 because it dealt combat damage to a player, and that gives it ward 2. So your Skitter Tiller now is a 4/4, it has ward 2. It's just a really nice curve. So that's something I'm quite a big fan of. Thorngrafter's a ton of counters for 1 mana. You can spread counters around as well. It gets a keyword of your choice. And something I really like is how it plays with Getaway Proxy. So Getaway Proxy is basically a save spell. It bounces one of your creatures to your hand, but before it bounces, it takes all their counters, auras, all that good stuff. So going like Thorngrafter Getaway Proxy turns can just dump loads of counters for the board, and it gets you a cheap Axiomatic Shift. It gets you a cheap Pinnacle of Progress. Like those two together make Pinnacle of Progress cost 3. Like, there's a lot of things that combo does that I'm a very big fan of. And even in general, this just gives you a way to save your creatures while staying on board into targeted removal. Like, them trying to kill your 3/3 Seeker of New Horizons, you just replace it with Getaway Proxy, still 3/3. You have Seeker for another turn. Very nice. It can save a Skitter Tiller. It can do, like, some things. It's quite lovely, and I'm a fan of that. Any other cards that I'm missing? I covered all the creatures. Distributive Justice. So something I really like is Distributive Justice in this list. And Distributive Justice enters and distributes 3 counters among cards you control for 3 mana. It's a very like okay flat rate. Like curving it after a Skitter Tiller makes it a 5/5 that then tramples over and could be a 6/6. That's really intense on curve. Overbearing Researcher, if like Researcher puts a counter on itself and then you Distributive Justice it, Researcher is now a 5/5 that has ward 4. And that's problematic for a lot of decks. You can't work Safety Violation that thing anymore, at least not reasonably. It sticks around and that gives problematic ward to your other stuffs. You can make Seeker large, you can give Thorngrafter Trample and make that thing large. Just a lot of cool things Distributive does. And it actually flips sometimes in this list as well, because Army of Tracks and New Survivors are tutorable. New Survivors makes copies of itself, so when it enters, you get 3 1/1s that help Distributive Justice flip. Army of Tracks into Distributive Justice or after a Distributive Justice makes a bunch of bodies, and it makes it kind of easy to flip. And if you flip it, Distributive Justice then makes all of your creatures have the same power and toughness as your largest creature at the beginning of each combat step. And if you can't see right here, Pinnacle of Progress is a 5/5. So if you're like flipping a Distributive Justice into dropping a Pinnacle of Progress, you're beating in for some crazy stats. You're growing Florin Grafter +5/+5. You're growing Skitter Tiller +3/+3. Seeker of New Horizons +4/+4. Overbearing Researcher +4/+4. It's just so many stats really fast. Your survivors get +4/+4. Going like survivors, distributive, pinnacle. Like there's just so many things that distributive justice does when you flip it. Sorry, I'm like trying to find the thing again. So yeah, I really like the backside on this. It's kind of neat that it does stuff sometimes. And outside of that, just like the front side's like a gang of counters. Lastly, you have a couple Let Them Eat Cake for removal. But you also have Armed Uprising. This is a card I'm testing out in the list right now. Armed Uprising puts out 4 keyword counters and then draws a card for each creature you control the counter on it. It's a pretty good refuel in this deck. It's 28 creatures. The curve is relatively low, all things considered. Like, it's not unreasonable to be drawing like 2 or 3 cards off of this. I'm really excited to see how it plays. It's better into decks that are trying to outrace you or outgun you, that are just trying to outscale you because they're going to be interacting with your board slightly less. It's a little bit worse into decks that are trying to control the board down. So we'll see how it goes. There might even be funny plays where you just like Overbearing Researcher, Distributive Overbearing Researcher to make it a 5/5 ward, and then you Armed Uprising it to give you like 4 different counters. And even if Armed Uprising is only drawing like 1 card at that point, you still have, a Ward 9. It's basically Hex Reef. You basically have like a 5/5 Hex-proof Trample, Vigilance, Reach, Death Touch. Like, there's some things Armed Uprising does. It's very funny. So, yeah, there's that. In the sideboard, you have some pretty standard stuff. Soulguide Lantern for Graveyard. Hey, more Club Promoters to hit artifacts and enchantments. I think Club Promoters is insane for any toolbox list, and this is no exception. More Survivors. So something I was kind of thinking you could do is that if you're against decks that are looking to board wipe you turn after turn, which is something you are a little weak to until you get established with your bigger things, is that you can run more Survivors. And since Survivors draw you a card when they die, it puts your opponent in a really tight spot where you just dropped 3 bodies to the board, but also they kind of need to wipe you because, you have your Armed Uprisings, you have your Army of Tracks, which Survivors count as like 3 devotion to. You have Distributive Justice, which can grow your Survivors and start threatening to flip immediately for giant, disgusting turns. There's a lot of things that you can do to scale off of these guys, and then having them available right afterwards to like draw cards if they do get wiped, to then refuel and dump more cards the next turn, maybe even more new Survivors. It's very good into decks that are just banking on tons of board wipes and hoping that's enough. Against aggro, you can side in an Avatar of the Festival and some more Jit Crews. They're tutorable. Avatar sets your base life total back up to a highish amount if you drop is active. Outside of that, though, Indomitable Jit Crew also just gains a bunch of life and stabilizes. It's very good into decks that are like trying to be the aggressor versus you. There's an extra Distributive Justice. If you're siding in these Survivors, you can also side in a Justice because it helps you get tall over some removal, and it is 3 hasted damage, sort of. So I really like this. I think the Survivors Justice combo is really dope. Then just some extra cake if you need to kill small stuff on curve more reliably. So that's pretty much everything for this list. I will talk about some other options that you can be doing in this kind of deck. Well, I decided to stay green-white and focus on cards that were individually very good at beating down. You could definitely splash blue. You have cards like Tiras, which can distribute extra counters. It draws you cards. It's better into slower matchups like Control for sure, in my opinion. But it's just like a very generically good card draw engine. If you ult it, it could be decent. So yeah, I don't know. Tiras is like an option. It's definitely one of the pulls to ban on top of Severin. Severin also is a 4-drop walker. Instead of drawing you cards, it makes tokens, and you can spend counters to eventually get an extra turn. I didn't like what it offered here just because I didn't want to remove like board presence just to take an extra turn. It felt a little backwards to me. Um, you know, dropping my Seeker from like a 5/5 down and other stuff like that just did not sound appealing even if you're getting an extra turn out of the deal. Like if I was doing that, I would rather have that with Axiomatic Shift to then develop another threat. So I decided to go away from Severin, but against more control-y decks, the constant supply of tokens can be strong, and like the extra turn could just eke out that tiny bit of damage you need for, say, a lethal. So I think Severin does some things. I just didn't like what he offered, and again, I was trying to keep the mana base somewhat succinct, I think is the word I'm looking for, so that I can keep growing Seeker of New Horizons as much as I can. Honestly, these Heart of the Glades and Buried Colossuses might not even be correct because of Seeker, but we'll see. Even in like a work safety violation world, Seeker of New Horizon demands answers or it kills people. So there's that. Oh yeah, one card I did not put in this deck that very much could deserve a spot is Xeno. So what Xeno does is once per turn, when you put a counter on another creature you control, you can put a counter of that kind on Xeno. If he did not already have that counter on him, he draws a card. And then he has a respectable Centaur Courser, just 3 mana, 3/3 base stat line. He barely didn't make the cut. He was in this deck basically up until the final version where I decided I didn't need him. I went away from him because the counter is, like, he draws one card on delay, kind of. The deck is mostly +1/+1 counters across everything. Like, there's occasional other stuff, like Armed Uprising and Thorngrafter. But for the most part, it's just +1/+1 counters, so he's only drawing one card. He does grow, but he just felt very slow to me. So I shied away from him for the first version of this list, but he's a respectable mid-range beatdown card that also draws cards, like knees removal. It's not a bad piece at all. So there's that. I think that's everything. I guess I'll talk about a couple more pieces, actually. We also have Absorbed Painter. I mentioned it earlier, but Absorbed Painter enters with 3 counters on it, which is really good for turboing out Pinnacle. It makes Pinnacle cost 4 mana by itself, so if you go like Painter, you can drop Pinnacle for 2 mana on turn 3, or if you play like Painter into Thorngrafter, same thing, you drop Pinnacle on turn 3. There's like some plays that Painter does. It puts out 3 counters for Axiomatic Shift, which, since, what is that? If you are able to get green-white on turn 2, that lets you tutor out a 3-drop for 2 mana, which is pretty cool. But it's better more in, like, turn 3 or 4, where you can tutor out, like, a 4 or 5-drop. It basically puts you ahead on curve with Axiomatic, which is neat. I didn't like what Painter did, because, again, I wanted to try Seeker, and I wanted the cards to do stuff if I did not draw Axiomatic Shift or Pinnacle, and Painter just sits there. If you aren't chaining one of these cards off of Painter, Painter just sits there and does nothing. It doesn't threaten life totals like Seeker or Skitter Tiller does. It doesn't protect your cards like Researcher. It doesn't let you spread out more counters or choose like a relevant keyword like Thorngrafter. It can't attack if you like put another counter on it with Distributive Justice. I just was not a big fan of Painter outside of combo shenanigans, and I think those combos are very fair. It just was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to make the deck a lot more kind of like bruisery, individual good stuff cards. So yeah. And yeah, one more thing. There is a play. I got destroyed. Not destroyed. I won, but it was very close. There is a really neat world where you play Symbol of Revolution with Genome Project. Symbol of Revolution has Flying, Lifelink, and Vigilance if you dare it, and it only costs 1 mana to do so at minimum. And Genome Project teaches creatures keywords when they enter based off of the keywords among other creatures you control. So you're spreading out these really good keywords to your other cards when you go Symbol of Revolution into Genome Project. And there's also like Skitter Tiller has Trample, Thorngrafter has a keyword of your choice. There's like things that do things with Genome Project, which is cool, especially if you have Symbol of Revolution into Genome Project. You can activate your first Symbol of Revolution, get the keywords, play the second Symbol of Revolution, activate it for another 1 mana, so you just spent 3 mana total. And then it has the keywords. You try to teach it with Genome Project, and since it already has the keywords, it then gets 3+1/+1 counters. And then you have a 3 mana 6/5 Symbol of Revolution, which is very, very scary. Outside of that, if you're doing a more white-based deck with Symbol of Revolution, even if you're not on Genome Project, Symbol is just a very strong beatdown card. It's a great target for getting counters. You could try Prince of the Pride out. It is a card I really want to brew with. What it does is that it puts counters on your other creatures at the beginning of the end step, and it gives favor to a creature, which gives it +1/+1 on legendary. So you're getting like +2/+2 immediately in stats the turn that you play Prince. 1/1 on attack, and then another 1/1 on end step, and it just keeps turning your other creatures into big nasty threats. Curving out with Prince of the Pride is something that's very scary and something I really want to try brewing with more as I go forward. It just didn't quite make the list because all the 1-drops that I wanted to play were in green. But you can make a white-based version of this deck probably, and I think Prince of the Pride is like a decent next step to go from there, just because of the amount of counters it can put out and how it just turns your other things into siege engines that need to be destroyed. So yeah, and that's everything about the green-white shifting progress deck. I really like it. You're playing beatdown most of the time, and sometimes you need to go into a more on the defensive play because there's other decks that just out aggro you, but you have a lot of ways to gain life. You have ways to search out more bodies or search out life. You can like get really tall, which makes it hard for them to kill it, and then you just eat their stuff on attack. There's things you can do. So yeah, I like this deck a lot. It's very neat. Axiomatic Shift, play it, good card. This next one is probably my favorite deck on the docket today. It's been something I've been kind of brewing in my head since Clicks was announced / released. Right before Clicks, we were on Brawl, and something that I kind of was sad about was that I did not make an Aetherios deck. Aetherios has a lot of really cool synergies with a lot of cards, and I was thinking about bringing it into the GP when Clicks came in, and then Clicks brought Serve Again as well, which lets you double down on your creatures coming back as well, and I figured it's finally time for me to make this deck and showcase it to the world. So there's a lot of really cool things for this deck. You have some really strong ETBs that are pretty annoying. Many of them are token generators. You have Indentured Laborer, which draws a card on ETB. And then you have these 3-drop cards that you play after your creatures that basically let you double dip on the value of these creatures. Aetherios, when creatures die, you exile them with coin counters and drain the opponent. So you're getting a little bit of stabilization / damage in that way. And then when it attacks, you can put a creature exiled with it, with a coin counter on it, under the battlefield under your control. So then you could double down on these. You need to get the devotion, but that is something you can do in this deck, which is nice. Serve Again, when your creatures die, you make a non-token copy of it with Decayed. Or you make a token copy of it with Decayed, my bad. So you immediately get the value again. Like, play Drek, play Serve Again, Drek dies, you then make another Drek. You just made an extra 1/1 on top of the Drek. There's things. Like, it's cool. This deck is very, very sticky and hard to deal with. Something else in this list, you have a lot of go-wide elements. So we have Love of a Lifetime, which lets you search out legendary creatures. It grows your board +1/+1. And it lets you search out that Aetherios if you do not have one to get on the board and start draining people, start doing all sorts of nasty things. You also have an option in like Eleanor, Royal Captain, and Alcadia for late game. If you get to flip Alcadia, it's just really game over. So I really like that piece. A lot of these tokens that we're making, Patron's token is an artifact, Wayward Drek's token is an artifact. You actually have a lot of artifacts in this deck. It was Extravagant Patisserie in the land base also makes food on enters. So you can start triggering these Cyber Souls for very cheap, which is pretty incredible. Wayward Drek grows in, like, has power and toughness based on the number of artifacts you control when it flips. Let me go ahead and pull up Cockatrice. So, like, Wayward Drek's backside, it's pretty good. When it transforms, you get another token and then it gets +1/+1 for each other artifact you control. So you can get this up to being like a 4/4 very reasonably, sometimes like 5/5 or 6/6, depending on how your board's been shaping up. It's very nice flipping it and just beating people's faces in. You have Synthetic Spectre, which is low on the curve, or I guess Rooftop Slink. You have Rooftop Slink, which is like your 1-drop, and with how many tokens you're making, you can easily Cyber Soul this for 1 or 2 mana. And the backside is Synthetic Spectre, which kind of demands removal. When it deals damage to players, they discard cards. Very mean. Also, when one of these flip cards die while like a Servigan is out on the field, you make a token copy of the backside if it's on the backside. So cloning like a Synthetic Spectre is just kind of backbreaking if like you flip into his Servigan and then they finally can remove this thing. It's just GG. It's very scary. So I like that a lot. One card in this list, Pursuer of Divinity, is super freaking cool. What it does is it lets you search out a flip card from your library when it enters, a double face card, and that also counts itself. So it keeps your card flow going late into the game, which I really like. When it enters, you can search out another copy of Pursuer of Divinity, which then can search out another copy of Pursuer of Divinity. You can search out Wayward Drex, you can search out Eleanor, you can search out Alcadia. I also put a Singleton Skycleaver in here, which you have the option of searching out. There's a lot of cards that it gets, which I like a lot. And on the backside of it, it does something similar to Aetherios and Servigan, where if Abandoner of Flesh, which is the backside, or another transform permanent you control dies, return that card to the battlefield untransformed. While it does not work with Aetherios, if you have Aetherios on the field, you're in a good spot usually. But it does work with Servigan. And if like you flip Abandoner of Flesh, which is a 4/4 flying vigilance that touch, it's very good stat lines, like it demands answering. If you flip this after a Servigan, not only do you get a token copy of Abandoner of Flesh, you also then get the Pursuer of Divinity back, which then searches for another card in your library. So like you play Pursuer, search a card, flip Pursuer, you know, you have that, and then it dies and serve again, and like there's so much powerful things. Basically, this deck is very, very strong into any sort of destroy removal, and it kind of demands exiling as a result. Aetherios is work safety, is forklift certified. It's indestructible. You can't destroy it with work safety, and yeah, deck's very good into board wipes, despite how creature heavy it is. I like it a lot. Is there anything else I really forgot to talk about? Love of Lifetime, Servigan, Omen. Omen's just removal. Iris is just removal. I kind of decided to split Omens and Iris Pledges at the moment. Iris Pledge lets you mana sink it to do more things. You can exile graveyards and gain life for all the non-lands exiled that way. Gives you a little bit more stabilization. If you pay colorless, you can copy something with mana value 3 or less in your opponent's exile. Gives you some great late game value that way. It also doesn't have any limits like permanent or non-creature or whatever. So you can exile like an opponent's work safety violation, for example, and blow up their board back. Stuff like that. It's really cool. So I really like having the main deck Graveyard Hate in Iris Pledge. And let's see, anything else? I have a script that I'm technically should be following. I guess I didn't talk about Indentured Labor tons, so I'll go ahead and cover that now. Labor is really good in this deck. So, when it enters, you draw a card and lose a life. It's basically this deck's version of Elvish Visionary. Nothing crazy on that front. But recasting it on like Servigans and Aetherioses just gets you really far into your library for cheap. Indentured Labor being a 1/2 is also actually very relevant in the format. There's a lot of strong 1/1s running around that aggro decks are relying on, like the Blue-Black Temple list. They have Writhlings, they have Deep Shudder Arcanists. There's other ones that I'm thinking of. Gubernatorial Fundraiser is a 1/1. There's Thorngrafters are 1/1s, although they'll usually death touch you. But that's besides the point. Like, Sparks of Revolution is a 1/1. There's a lot of good 1/1s running around that aggressive decks are going to try to beat you down with, and Labor helps gum up the board for those very efficiently. So, I'm a big fan of Labor. It doesn't even make you lose life, air quote, infinitely with Aetherios out, because Aetherios will drain when your creatures die. So, you know, Laborer, it dies, you gain some life. If you get Aetherios turned on, you can then swing with it, bring back Laborer, gain some life, chump with Laborer, or like lose some life, draw a card, chump with Laborer, drain. Like, it's very nice. You don't completely just burn out going crazy with indentured laborers. And yeah, on the sideboard side, there's this really cute thing, proto-class behemoths. For decks that are trying to outskill you, especially on like the Gotel angle, this deck can very reasonably run proto-class behemoth. Iris Pledge exiles, Aetherios exiles. There's cards that exile cards from your opponent's board, main deck. Eleanor, Royal Captain, that exiles if you flip her. And then on top of that, we also have like Lurking Verkalakas and Rydlings in the sideboard that also exile graveyards. So if you are versus an opponent that's just trying to build something really big to kill you, because going wide is usually tough against this deck, you can side in these proto-class behemoths and just make their life a living nightmare. Especially if you start to like serve again or recast them off Aetherios, that's just GG. You're getting the ETP triggers again, and it's just a pain in the butt for decks to deal with. Verkalakas and Rydling barely need any mentions. They're just good graveyard hates. They gain you life. They're also good against aggro sometimes. Like, yeah, some single target removal and let them eat cake. Good card, great card, sided in versus aggro. And then some Agonizing Remorses. Oh, actually, I remember now. Yeah, this sideboard was different last night when I was recording, but I changed it up because I got inspired on the removal suite. Realized that we were really heavy on like sacrifice, but nothing really targeted. But I thought Agonizing Remorse was like a very nice additional piece. It sets you up for your behemoths as well, since it exiles. It gives you hand attack. It's just very nice into control list. Or not control, it's just good into stuff in general. Like, Agonizing Remorse is a good card. It just rips stuff from the game. Like, if you're ever facing down an incumbency list, or if you need to remove a board wipe, or really anything, just agonizing people to death and make them cry. For other options for this deck, while I chose to put in Chosen of Heliod because recurring them's very good, they punch holes in people, just a powerful card. You have some other options. There's Inner Ring? There's Inner Ring's Pupil, which if you're abusing ETBs with Serve Again and Aetherios, it's very nice on that front. It adds into the discard package that Iris Pledge could opt into and that Rooftop Slink does. Make the game small, Rings People makes the game even smaller, and then you just edge value out until people die. Very, very cozy. I think it's a real option you could choose over Chosen of Heliod. On top of that, especially if you put an Inner Rings People, you could choose to go for Gary. Grey Merchant of Vassaville was reprinted in Age of Tracks, and it's a lovely card. A lot of people know this card. A lot of people love this card. It enters and it drains life based on your devotion to black. And that's pretty reasonable in this deck. And especially if you're starting to clone it off of Serve Again tokens, recast it off of Aetherios, it starts to get out of hand pretty fast. You know, I drain you 3, I drain you 4, I drain you 5. Like, that adds up. It kills people. I think Gary's a very reasonable card for this deck. It just barely was not there because I decided to go for like Chosen of Heliod, some other cards, and I wanted to try this Cyber Soul package. But it's a card you can build this deck around instead. It's 5 mana, little expensive. It goes insane when it hits the board. Oh yeah, the sideboard pieces with like Verkalakas, Rydling, and Protoclass, you could mainboard them. They're very good mainboard pieces. Like, it's kind of surprising. Rydlings with Aetherios out actually draw you a card when you die because they die, go to graveyard, Aetherios then exiles them. So it gets you the draw trigger on Rydling, which is really cool. So you could actually go for this like Exile Enter Great package as like the main board deck as well, especially in like a Black Devotion version of the list. So yeah. This is the deck. I love it a lot. I think it's very fun. I think there's some interesting things it does. It goes tall, it goes wide, it drains life, it's sticky, it's cool. Oh boy, here we go. Up next, we have Red, Green, Blue, Vigorous Victory, Aggro. So, this is a deck that has one of the coolest cards in the format to me, which is Gaigeka, Tide of Victory. if it sticks around for one turn, in this list in particular, it's not unlikely to get completely turned on and you get your giant beatstick reward. Whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell, you get a choice of a counter among like a list, and when it has 4 or more counters, it gets hexproof and is an artifact creature. So if you play turn 3 Gaigeka, and then you play 4 1-drop spells, which this deck can do, it has a lot of 1 mana cost flashbacks, like pay 1 mana, play a spell, pay 1 mana, flash it back. They all dig cards. You can flip this Gaigeka, and you suddenly have a 5/5 flying, vigilance, trample, hexproof. And a lot of decks are not raising that. Outside of that, we also have Laystone's Vigor in the board. This is a card people have been wanting to brew for a bit, but it's just been a little awkward for a lot of lists, but I think it has a home here. Whenever you cast a sorcery spell, reveal the top card of your library. If its mana value is less than the greatest power among creatures you control, put it into your hand. So, with that, a lot of the creatures, Lanternlight Assailant and Ironcliffe Blaster, they grow their power. Savvy Smith is 2 power at base, Gaigeka is giant, and this entire curve is 3 mana or less, and honestly, there's only like 7 3-mana cards. The entire curve is 2 mana or less, basically. So, Laystone Vigor becomes a very real engine. You have like Industrialized and Igneous Visions for 1-cost spells, and since your creature's prowess up, you can stack it to where they get the power before Laystone's Vigor, and you're just drawing cards very, very consistently. And I like it a lot for that reason. It wouldn't be unreasonable to draw like 2 or 3 cards with Laystone's Vigor in one of your storm turns. Sorry, I'm stretching. So, I quite like that a lot. Yeah, the deck is like all 1-drops. Like half the deck is 1-drops at least. On top of that, Lanternlight Assailant's very good in this list. It surveils whenever you cast a spell. It flies, so it's hard to block. It lets you dump these flashback cards into graveyards while abusing them, while playing with Laystone's Vigor. Very good. Something else is that if you cast instants with Laystone's Vigor, it gives +2/+2 at instant speed because they're instants. And all the instants on this list, High Voltage and Momentous Charge, they're all there for kill turn. Momentous Charge grants Trample, +2/+0. High Voltage is a bolt. It basically is just a bolt in this deck. There's nothing fancy about it. But if you have like Lanternlight Assailant plus Laystone's Vigor out, and then you Momentous Charge twice for 3 mana, it's like if you just go Lanternlight, Laystone's, Momentous Charge. That's your card. You are dealing 10 damage in the air. Lanternlight got 2 prowess triggers to go up to 2 power. Momentous Charge is now giving another 4 on the front and backside for 6. And Laystone got 2 instant procs for another +4. So that's 10 damage on turn, like, off of this combo. It's very cool. That blows people up. I don't have the picture up, but Ironcliffe Blaster is just another prowess card. It's a 1-mana 1/1, cast an instant or sorcery, gets +1/+1 and gains first strike until end of turn. It's just another option. You kind of need good, cheap prowess creatures when you're on this kind of game plan. This deck is running Ragtag squads right now, and part of the reason for that is like the creature count's very low, and Ragtag squad is just a very good aggressive sorcery. I'll pull it up real quick. But Ragtag squad, just 2 creatures, one's with haste, one's trample. Creature types don't really matter too much in this deck, in this version of it, but yeah, just a good token generator. Especially with like Savvy Smith, which lets you make tokens when you cast instant sorceries. It gets you a nice like go wide angle if you really need it. Gets you bodies to fuel Gaigeka. Pretty nice. Savvy Smith as well is very good in this because you can use it to loot, which then dumps your flashback cards into your graveyard. You can use it to add a mana of any type, which lets you turbocharge a Gaigeka turn, and again it makes the tokens, so it's very strong in this list as well. Anything else? Oh, I did put in 2 copies of Lightspeed Launcher into this list. It's mostly a test card at the moment. The nice thing about Lightspeed Launcher is that it draws when you amp it up, which is, you know, attack with 3 or more or cast 2 spells in a turn. And you're always drawing a card in this deck every turn after turn 3 with this card. You're always double casting every turn, basically. So you're drawing at least 1 card with Lightspeed every turn, and sometimes 2 if you're playing like Ragtag. You get it with a Savvy or just Ragtag plus either of the 1-drops. So I think Lightspeed has a place in here. I think it's viable. I think Leestone's Vigor is likely better in this deck, but it's they play in a similar space. Lightspeed has a little bit more consistent floor where you don't need a board to necessarily draw cards, whereas Leystone lets you draw like 3-4 cards in a turn, maybe even 5 depending on what kind of like crazy storm turn you get. So Lightspeed Launcher, testing it out. In the sideboard we have, this is a more experimental choice in Research Grant. When it enters, you get to look at 3 cards and put 1 into your hand, the rest into the yard. And with all these flashback cards, you are likely getting an extra card or 2 when you do this on top of whatever card you put to hand. The flips for this policy are pretty trivial, and if you manage to flip it, it lets you basically double a spell's cost to then get extra value out of it. So I can pay an extra mana with Momentous Charge to get even more, like a bigger buff. I can like pay 2 on Industrialize to go card neutral or card positive if I'm flashing it back. Same like Igneous Vision, similar story. I can pay 4 on Ragtag Squads to get tons of tokens. I thought it was an interesting piece versus Control to kind of get you that extra bit of value you may need to get over the hump. So very excited to see how Research Grant does and if it's ever worth citing in. I put an Ozonite Pledge into the deck as well. There's a few bit of flash lists and decks that are just very like removal dense that are kind of problematic for your deck. Your creature count's not very high. This is here to pad out the creature count, and also being an instant speed 3-1 on your opponent's end step makes it synergize really well with Leystone's Vigor, because like I said, every single card in this deck besides like 7 of them are easy to get off of 3 power with Leystone's Vigor, because it draws based off your highest power. So Ozonite Pledge plus Leystone's Vigor is a really neat combo. It optionally mana sinks if you're like really want to do that, like getting it bigger or giving it haste or trample. Like there's things. It's also more instant count for Leystone for burning through phases. So it's nice if you are just getting kind of destroyed on the creature front where they're just chaining removal into your board and you're kind of sad. Lastly, Recycle of Life. Not much. It's Graveyard Hate. It's this deck's version of Rivaling. 1 mana, exile a card, get a counter, mill a card. It's very simple, very good. Flashbacks for 2 mana, gains a little bit of life. Rebel's Reclamation, just some artifact hate. Destroy an artifact and put a counter on a creature you control. Nice. Grows your prowess, guys, while killing problematic artifacts. And then one card that I think people are not using, but they probably should, is Massive Predation. Massive Predation is really neat. It's +2/+1, and it lets one of your creatures fight another creature. And if you're curving that with like Lantern Light Assailant, Lantern Light just became a 4/3 kill a thing, swing with flying. Savvy Smith, 4/3 kill a thing, make like a token or get back a mana to then cast other stuff. Like there's some really cool things. I think Massive Predation's nice in this list for fighting other decks that are looking to curve against you as well. So I think that this is a card that could be exciting to see. Ironcliff Blasters is like the worst hit for Predation because it only becomes a 4/2 after you play Predation, so it dies into a little more things, but it's still not like the worst, especially if you're just like, I want to kill your 1-drop while punching it for 4 damage. It's very fine. It's a little sadder into Symbol of Revolution, but against the rest of the 1-drops in the format, a-okay. So yeah, that's basically this deck. As far as other options go, you could try cutting the green out and going up on Lightspeed launchers, going up on your Savvy Smith, going up on your blasters, and you know, just play it as a more straight prowess deck. I think that it might actually be worth doing this green splash for. Like, I built this deck wanting to try these cards out, but I think they may actually be worth it just because they give you a lot of outs into decks that are looking to board wipe you. This deck's pretty susceptible into board wipes. Like, all these creatures are cheap. You're not running any counter spells. Like, Work Safety Violation can just wipe multiple things off the board. The actual -3/-3 Kudiata does it as well. Like, your deck is fairly weak to board wipes, so I think these like green card splashes are pretty worth. But if you want to try just a red-blue prowess version out, you have a more consistent mana base, and I think that deck is more explosive. But it just loses out on some of this long-term value that this deck can technically generate. Any other cards that you could do? Let me see. Oh yeah, if you're doing the red-blue version as well, you could opt for Fervous Sensation. popular card, good card, was kind of a menace a couple GPs ago. Um, Not much to say, just double spell, puts counters, move counters, fades out. Good card. Um, there is a version of this deck that is more mid-rangey that you can do. I decided to keep the curve low so that Lace-Stone Vigor was more consistent, but you can do a version of this deck with like Lacework Wielder, which in this deck is a 4 mana 4/4 or 5/5 trample haste. Because it's not unreasonable to be like Lacebark Wielder, Momentous Charge it. You're suddenly swinging with 6 haste trample. Lacebark Wielder, like you're gonna find ways to spend green, blue, red on instants and sorceries in this list. So I think this is a very strong, more mid-rangey beatdown piece if you're trying to more nuke people out over the top. And it's a reason to go tall. You also have some really good red-green cards specifically that are nice if you're okay going higher up on the curve. Golthus' Judgment, it's an instant that like can put out counters or do fighting, plays well with like the instant cast mode of Laystone, deals damage to people's faces if you need. Pretty cozy. There's like Abominable and Avalanche. Deals 3 divided. If you spend 5 mana, you get another 3/3. This is just like a generically good value card. And then also Pact of Power is surprisingly consistent in this list. Lantern Light Assailants, 3 creature types. Savvy Smith is 2 that don't even overlap, and then it makes construct tokens, which also don't overlap. Ironcliff Blasters, a dwarf soldier, which doesn't overlap with anything. Ragtag lets you get like creature types of your choice. It's not unreasonable to pay most or even all the modes on a Pact of Power, and if you do, you're sitting very pretty. So I think Pact of Power is also another option. The only reason I didn't play like Pact of Powers and Lacebarks was because they costed 4, and I was trying to keep the low mana base, like I was saying. But you can easily make a bigger version of this deck. Maybe go up light speeds, go down lay stones, side out some of these pieces for these higher value dense cards that just destroy people turn 4 or 5. And I think it's reasonable. Alright. On to deck number 4. Yeah, Jeskai Incumbency. Alright, so Incumbency is interesting. It's a card that there is a lot of buzz about when Clix was first announced as rotating in. And all that buzz kind of died down immediately when it got nerfed right before the set dropped. And the nerf was that you needed 5 different colors among permanents to win the game off of the Incumbency win condition. For those that don't know Incumbency, it's basically a sorcery speed revitalized with multiple upsides. Draw a card, gain 3 life, make a pledge. If you've cast 4 or more spells named Incumbency this game, and there are 5 colors among permanents you control, you win the game. But yeah, all that buzz died down the second that it got this additional piece that you needed to assemble in order to win. And I think that it's still very viable in format. Like, I think it's a good card. In order to get this, like, 4 cast mode off, there's a couple linchpin cards in this deck. There's Get Your Wish, which lets you tutor out non-creature spells and even cast one for free, depending on the number of colors you have. You can tutor out incumbencies to then get closer to that 4 threshold. Or you can tutor out like a removal spell in a pinch. Truth Cleavers are very powerful in this deck because they let you sacrifice them to exile cards from your yard to recast them, and that counts incumbency. If you have like 2 Truth Cleavers, you only need to draw 2 incumbencies to win the game. That's, you know, draw incumbency or draw Get Your Wish. You only need like a mix of 2 to win the game on top of Truth Cleavers. You just have to get to enough mana to play all of them. So Truth Cleaver is very cool in this deck. Demographer is great. Well, you also need to get to the board, but we'll get to that bit in a minute. Demographer is really good in this deck. It loots. Ideally, you will be pledging Tyrell in this list almost every time. Or like 99% of the time, because Tyrell pledge lets you surveil whenever you pledge. Where is it? Tyrell Bureau. So yeah, pledge, surveil 2. It's very good. It makes your demographers like draw a card, discard a card, surveil 2. It makes your ballot registrars surveil 2 on ETB. It makes an incumbency, draw a card, gain 3 life, surveil 2. So it digs for more copies of itself or Get a Wish. Even Gubernatorial is like pretty good once you have Tyrell pledge out, because it's 2 mana, make a treasure, surveil 2. It like gets you the mana and then sets up your draw as well. So very, very cozy on that front. Something I thought was very interesting for this deck as well is that in order to get like an amount of colors among permanents you control, I need to find a way to get green, which is kind of tough in a Jeskai based deck. But I realized Cryptolab was very, very good in this deck. So, for those of you that don't know Cryptolab, it exiles your hand and the top card of your deck, and you could play them for as long as they're exiled. So it basically cantrips. But on top of that, it adds 2 mana. It taps out 2 mana, and you can't use it to spend cards in your hand. But you know what it can do? It can pay for a Truth Cleaver cast. It can pay for a Demographer active. It can pay for pledges like Tyrol Bureau. It can pay for the pledges on their own. It lets you pay for a straw. It lets you do like a couple really cool things in this list and just turbos out your game plan a lot faster than I think most people will be expecting. So I like that a lot. If people destroy it, it's kind of like C'est La Vie. It drew you a card when it entered. It's fine. Like, 4 mana, draw a card. Oh, your opponent kills the thing that drew you a card. Fine. I'll take the value. Like, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. It is like a little expensive, but you can suffer. In order to get green as well, this deck's also running a copy of Ragtag Squads, which you can fetch for with Get Your Wish. So it's a tutorable green source on demand. You technically also have Quintril Accords, which gets you 5 colors. There are some decks that can outscale a Quintril Accords, but it does at least get you your 5 colors for like an Astroph. I think if I were to redesign this deck, I would take out the black entirely and just say I'm always pledging Tyrol and try to add a couple more green sources like another Ragtag, another Cryptolab, but that's an aside. I think this deck's very interesting. You can get the 5 colors pretty realistically on top of the 4th incumbency, and you gain a lot of life in this deck. Also, one card I didn't talk about is Tense Negotiation. So the way you kill an incumbency deck normally is to beat them down before they can get their 4th cast off, or somehow keep them off their colors. But Tense Negotiations is really problematic because you can pay 2 life or pay 2 mana to gain 2 life, and then an opponent may pay 2, and if they don't, you draw a card. And most of the time, if you're trying to beat down an incumbency deck, you cannot be affording to slow down your game plan to pay 2 to prevent them from drawing a card. Like, that's not something you can do. You can't just pay that tax. So, Tense Negotiation is really good in this list. It also is especially good into like more Burny decks, like the Jund Golden Age that's running around, because they can't really afford to pay the cost. It helps you pad out your life total on top of incumbency gaining your life to just kind of push you outside of some of their burn reach. It's not a perfect answer, but it's definitely a thing that helps. So I really like Tense Negotiation in here. Cryptolab also helps pay for it, which is nice. Like the mana that you get from Cryptolab makes this like trivial. I don't know. I like it a lot. In the sideboard, we have some Agent of Deceptions. Agent of Deception is just a very strong card for destroying more creature decks trying to curve out against you. They tap out, play their 3-drop, you Agent of Deception, and they cry. Top of that, we also have an extra Braze. We put in a pack of Vetoes and Beoclair Scorns. And, wait, Veto. This should actually probably be... Let me go ahead and just edit this right now. We should probably actually be on, like, 2 Vetoes and 2 Refracts. And I'll tell you why in a second. Let me go back now. Okay. So, Vetoes are very good in this deck. You basically have a 1 mana counter a non-creature spell. Veto makes them pay based on the number of colors you have, and that's easily at 3 colors minimum, sometimes 4, sometimes 5. 1 mana counter spell, good. Beoclair Scorn also can help nuke out problematic... Why am I forgetting how to spell this? Beoclair. There you go. Can help you nuke out a problematic card from a matchup. You can get rid of, like, Crown Guard's bans if you counter them and other stuff. It's a little fiddly on that front, but... yeah, I think if there's one thing, Crown Guard's ban is very problematic for this deck, and I forgot to add a way to remove that, so putting in some like artifact and enchantment removal in the sideboard is probably paramount for this deck. Maybe go down Agent, get rid of this extra Cake and Braze, and get in some, like, Scatter the Signals. Anyways, part of the reason why I wanted to put in Refract into this deck, Refract hits anything. It counters a spell, look at their hand and the top of their library. So Refract lets you counter anything unless they pay 2, and Bioclair lets you counter instants and sorceries and extract them from the list, essentially. And you can do some really nasty things with Get Your Wish since it's instant speed to lock your opponent out. If they play a meaningful instant or sorcery, you can Bioclair. If they play a meaningful creature, you can Refract. If they do neither, you can fetch like Incumbency. Like, there's just a lot of really good options you can do when counter spells are on the table for Get Your Wish that I like. It gives you just a lot of flexibility. So that's why I opted for the refracts. But yeah, I think getting more artifact and enchant removal in the sideboard's pretty big here. So I'd maybe do that. You are really torn on options for board wipes in this deck. Your best option is work safety. You really don't want to wipe yourself, so work safety being more of a one-sided wipe is pretty big. But it's 2 of the colors you're not, as in like you're playing red, blue, white, and work safety costs green and a black. So it's really awkward on the mana base, and you have problems casting it sometimes. It's not the biggest deal with Get Your Wish in the list, honestly, but ideally you're getting your wish for incumbencies, so you can't bank on that to cast. So I opted not to go for work safety violation. And like for other options, they all kind of wipe your board. They're all like 2 damage to all, maybe destroy all creatures, stuff like that. And your creatures are like pretty good for getting your colored count, especially like ragtag squads. So it's kind of awkward to side in board wipes. So maybe you can opt for a singleton work safety in the main board that you can fetch. Don't know. That's something you can do. I was very, very, very close to putting in Chainbreaker's Familiar and decided not to. Chainbreaker's Familiar is interesting because when it enters, you can exile an instant or sorcery from your yard, and you may cast a copy of it until the end of your next turn, which again helps you win off of just 2 incumbencies getting found. I think it's better for best of 1. For that reason, once opponents sideboard in, they can bring in Graveyard Hate, and it makes it a lot more awkward. I barely didn't make the cut because I felt like Truth Cleaver did the same thing but better in most scenarios. It like looted you for 2 mana. This deck is very good at digging, and Truth Cleaver helps up that quota. So I decided not to go for Chainbreakers, but it's something you could totally look at for like game 1 cheese, just going up on Chainbreakers on top of the Truth Cleavers to win off of 2 incumbency finds. So yeah, I think that's an option you could do for this deck inside them out for like games 2 and 3. You could opt for like more gubernatorials as well, but eh. I think that's most of it. I think this deck is very neat. Alright. Carta's Mono Red Splash. So this is a list I brewed back towards the beginning of Clicks being announced. I don't know why I felt like building Carta all of a sudden, but I think I just get this itch to go against the grain, and with Clicks being a 3-colored ally set, or like wedge set, I kind of wanted to do shards. I thought it was funny, and Carta stuck out to me as a Mardu card people do not build around very often. I think they're more in love with like Ardor and stuff like that. But what Carta does is it gives your creatures +2/+1 on attack. So it's a bigger buff than Ardor, and it also doesn't care if your creatures are non-tokens. Like, it works with your Wild Fangs and makes them 5/2s, for example, which is pretty crazy. It works with, like, where is it? It works with Gubernatorial, making it like a 3/2. It works with the gods if you animate them. It works with Fame Weaver, making it like a 3/4 double strike before Fame Weaver's ability triggers. There's just some cool things. So I really like Carta for that reason. Fame Weaver is also similar. It's basically extra copies of Carta. It's not legendary, which is very nice. And whenever you attack, it gives +2/+0 to the board, and you could optionally play the cards that you mill, but you lose out on some of this buff. But it's just another way to get +2/+0 on your creatures. Now, like Spark of Revolutions, caring about dealing 3 damage with a single permanent, these cards, Carta and Fame Weaver, make Spark way more consistent than Ardor of Peace ever will. It helps you get that 3 damage threshold if just one creature gets through, because everything has at least 1 power, and then they get +2/+0. So I really like how these synergize with Sparks a lot. On top of that, this deck's also running Koi's, which is a massive just value bomb card. Wildfang is too, but Kois in this list is actually very castable thanks to redeveloped Cityscape fetching multiple mountains, and you're only running like one copy of non-mountain lands. It's very reasonable to be able to cast Kois on turn 4 or 5, sometimes even 3 if you have like a good gubernatorial curve, and it just dominates games once it sticks. So I love Kois. It lets you clone a bunch of things, and cloning a bunch of creatures, hasting them on top of like a Fame Weaver and a Carta is just backbreaking. We're also running a couple of Iris's Judgment at the top of the curve, and it's very easy to get Devotion to red in this deck. And if you do so, Iris's Judgment makes 4 creatures, and then it gives your creatures +1/+1. So on top of it, if you curve out like Carta or Fame Weaver into an Iris's Judgment, that is +2 to your 4 2-power creatures. You're swinging with 16 hasted damage, which is a lot. That's a lot of damage. It's almost one-shotting somebody just on Judgment alone. If you have anything, like if you played Mogus even before you played one of these two, and then you Iris's, like, opponent's taking 21 damage. Or 20 damage on the dot. Like, it's so much burst damage. So I really like how Iris's plays in here. Outside of that, Sparks of Revolution, 1 mana token card that flips, very strong card. I don't know if I need to talk about it too much. I guess I'll show the flip side for people that don't know, but it basically just makes extra tokens on attack whenever you attack. Whenever you attack, create a 1/1 soldier creature that's tapped to attack it. Simple. It works. It works with Fame Weaver and Carta, since you can stack with Fame Weaver and Carta. You can basically have like the Sparks make the token before Carta or Fame Weaver trigger. It only doesn't work with Mogus really. Spirit of Protest, 2 mana, get 2 bodies. You can pay a mana to sacrifice the enchantment to haste something. These cards, being enchantments, sit on the board for Devotion for like Kois and Iris's, which is really nice. And like hasting in a Fame Weaver late in the game is very, very good off of Spirit of Protest. Like paying 5 mana, play Fame Weaver, haste it on top of like a bunch of other creatures, gets you this nice double striker attack. Cozy, very cozy. And you can like occasionally hasten a god as well if the cards line up right and you're that stalled out, which is neat. Braze just gives you some extra single target removal. Kois is removal sometimes. This deck is a little removal light, which is one thing that some people may not love. Finding ways to go up on removal might be in this deck's best interest. Out of the sideboard, we have some pretty good options. I think Looming Psyhawk's actually pretty insane in this deck. With Looming Psyhawk being a flash lifelink flyer, you can basically flash this in on opponent's end step on turn 3, and then play your Fame Weaver or Carta and swing with it as a 4-power flying lifelinker, which is a massive life total swing. It's very good. If there's even like a slight reason to bring in Psyhawks versus a player, I think you do, just because it's a flinker. It has evasion, and like incidental hate is cool, but like I think it just needs that tiny bit of reason to play, and you are off to the races. Fall of Tracks is an interesting option that I really like, but it's hard to fit into lists sometimes. But if you can actually get most of these modes off, you're in a very good spot. So if you're against decks that are looking to resolve like Quindrill's Accords, Dante, maybe some other cards, you can side in Fall of Tracks to go mana positive on the removal spell, and then make a bunch of tokens afterwards. And it just helps extend your board a little bit into those scarier decks that are trying to just drop big bombs on you. This can exile Arbiters, this can exile like all sorts of stuff. Czars. There's some cool things. So yeah, against some of the greedier decks, Fall of Tracks can do some surprising work, I think. Zakros Decree. Your deck is a ton of enchantments. Like, it only says 8 here, but Card is an enchantment. Kois is an enchantment. I feel like there's more. Iros is an enchantment. Mogus is an enchantment. Zakros Decree actually triggers a fairly consistent amount of time, makes your creatures bigger, gives them lifelink. You can side this in against aggro sometimes, and it does work. I think I forgot to talk about Iris and Mogus in this deck a little bit. So Karda's ability is actually kind of just flavor text. Like, the only thing that matters is the +2/+1. You're very rarely animating it, and if you are actually dealing damage with your 7/7, the opponent should be dead in this deck. They never live that, so well, it's kind of fun to have the dream of fetching out an Iros and Mogus, which is arguably worse than Karda, for the record. Um, it's kind of just flavor text. You only care about the stat buff. But Mogus does deal damage whenever you attack, which is pretty nice, and it helps keep your devotion up. Same thing with Iros. Iros gains you life on attack instead of dealing damage to the opponent. And I felt like it was a little bit worse in this deck, but there's times where Iros will shine as well. And they're both just here for devotion count, mostly, on top of having these like nice passive effects. So yeah. Anyways, Scatter the Signal, good card. Hits artifacts, enchantments, and graveyards. Nothing much to say. Destroy artifact, destroy enchantment, exile graveyard. Instant speed. Maybe you can slide in with Psyhawk, and then you have your Brazes, and you actually have like a bit of instant speed play. And then lastly, Let Them Eat Cake. If there's a deck that actually does just beat you the hell down, or you need to exile their threats, Cake is, you know, the GOAT. It's the card that people love to see. So, yeah. I don't know. I like this deck a lot. It just dumps a lot of damage by, like, kind of out of nowhere later in the game, which I like a lot. As far as other options go, let's see. Do I have much here? You could put in the manlands. There's the red white. There's the red white one. I think it's called like Titan Stairs or something. Yeah. It's a flying land, and that could get up to 4 power after some of your 4 drops, which is pretty cool. I didn't opt for it because I didn't want to add too many untapped sources on top of this weird, or yeah, I didn't want too many tapped lands. But it's a card that just reaches over the top, and it's probably correct to bring some of these in. I could see people doing so. I think it's very reasonable. It's a good card. You could also put in Ardor if you want. Ardor counts 2 to devotion for red, even though it only buffs your tokens by 1 power and not every card by 2. It still does things. It creates bodies on its own. It's better on empty boards, notably. So, Ardor is still good. You can switch her in if you want the comfort. She's legendary though, so keep that in mind if you're going to try to clone her with Koist. Something nice about like Fameweaver, for example, is that it's not legendary for Koist. Anything else? You could opt for Afara's Oracle to set up your draws. I decided not... No, that's a good... Oracle. You could opt for Afara's Oracle if you want. It looks at 5 and lets you put an enchantment on top, and you're running like 18 enchantments or so. So there's like a decent amount of hits for you to set up your draws. I was not the biggest fan of this, so I ended up cutting it from the list, but it was in earlier iterations. It felt just a little bit too slow, you know? So, yeah, it's an option. It may be pretty good in here, honestly, but I would rather have, like, Patron of Afara's Glory in the deck instead. Makes 2 bodies, gets you some scry, gets you some life. It does something similar with a better board presence for these big 4 drops. So, that's why I chose Afara's Glory. Afara's Glory. And yeah. You could go up on removal as well, the main board. Okay. So this deck's really cool. This one's not from me. This one's from Platy People. It's also the only control deck on the list. But something that's really cool about this deck is that it's monocolor. And I only have like 2 decks that are 3-colored, or that are 2-colored, I believe. Like this is 3-color, 3-color plus, 3-color, 2-color, 2-color. That's like multiple colors. This is multiple colors. It's blue-white splashing colors, so I count it. This is like, it's rare to be on 2 colors in this format, and this deck's on 1 color, which is really fascinating. There's some really cool things that this deck does. So you are very consistent on your mana base. You have 26 lands. And then on top of that, Stroth ramps you, and Marilite ramps you as well. And Ballot Registrar, I'll take a step back. Marilite ramps you, and Ballot Registrar plus Stroth ramps you, because Stroth is an activated ability, and Ballot Registrar reduces the cost of activated abilities, and it pledges, so it counts as 3 colors. So Stroth then becomes mana positive. So that's a very cool interaction for this deck. So you have some ramp in that direction, on top of this very, like, nice instant speed interaction. You have counter spells and Omen of Deception. Divine Mishaps, even though they're just cancels, they draw you a card if you control a legendary permanent, and Destroth is legendary. Maralai is legendary. Arbiter is legendary. So that's like a really cool thing. If your opponent doesn't play cards that you need to counterspell, you can start drawing cards off of Dormant Monstrosity, which lets you activate its ability to remove stun counters, draw cards. And again, with Ballot Registrar, this ability becomes 1 mana, so you can pay blue, 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 draw 3 cards on your opponent's end step, and untap with a 4/4. So that's really cool. Demographer as well in this deck. Again, it's another pledge card to get a Stroth rolling, and it loots, which is really nice. I believe this deck will be picking Tyrell most of the time, although I could see it picking Silliman, Laboratories, or whatever. Sometimes just to tap creatures down and instant speed with Demographer, because you are playing this control package. So that's pretty cool. Agent of Deceptions makes people cry. I don't know if there's much to say about that. You know, just counter a creature spell based on your devotion to blue. And especially in a mono blue deck, this card can actually, like, get some reasonable X costs in there to where you can, like, counter things even if your opponent's not tapping out. Outside of that, like, because you have, like, these options for ramp with, like, a Stroth and Maralai, you have so many lands, you have controlled tools, you're looking to stick Arbiter or Hoarding Coulebre on the board and just destroying people from there. Like, why do you need to splash colors if you have 2 bomb cards in your colors already that are really hard to deal with? Coulebre can't be countered, has ward, draws you cards, flying, pain in the ass to deal with. Arbiter, it like bounces boards, untaps your land so you can double spell while playing it to keep it safe. You can destroy your opponent's hand by making both players shuffle their hands in and draw 2 cards. Like, Arbiter is just so oppressive if it actually sticks for like any time more than a turn. So yeah, deck has some Ephemeral Myers so it can go over the top sometimes. And yeah, that's most of the deck. It's very cool. I think this is a very neat interaction list, and it's what Platy's running in the GP right now. I don't know. I like it a lot. In the sideboard, Soul Guide Lanterns, standard card for killing graveyards. Crown Guard Bands, very like standard card for destroying specific pieces that make a deck crumble. More Agent of Deceptions, we like making people cry. Vetoes, counter non-creature spells for 1 mana. Very mana efficient, bring it into the right list. Again, make people cry. And then Absorbed Affinity, I think, is an interesting meta call. It works off of your devotion, and it steals cards. So, especially in a mono blue deck, you're very likely gonna get this to like 3 or 4 or maybe even more sometimes. And when you're doing that, like, stealing your opponent's turn 3 or 4 play can be backbreaking. And I think there's enough like aggressive or mid-range decks, and especially with this being instant speed, that it can kind of dominate some games. Like, resolve and absorb affinity, the game is over type plays. So I think it's an interesting meta call. I don't know how it will play into like Golden Age control. I think it's, you just don't side it in at that point, but yeah, against the decks that it is good against, it's very good against. So yeah, I'm not going to talk about like other options for this deck. It's Platy's deck. I don't want to try and override my own opinions on it. I think it's just a very cool list and definitely deserved a spot. It kind of showed up out of nowhere for this current GP. Like, maybe Platy played a couple of games on ladder beforehand, but there was no buzz about it. It did not show up in deck lists. There's no anything, so I felt like it was in the spirit of this list to bring it in. And again, like, who plays monocolor in this like day and age for this format? So I love what Platy's doing, and it's a very interesting and spicy list. All right, we're on final 2. Whew. All right. This deck is really cool. Sorry, had to cough. So we have white, blue, colorless, blinking brilliance. So something really fun with blinking brilliance, or Avatar Brilliance specifically, is that its effect is an ATB. It's not like if it was cast, no anything. It's an ATB, and it lets you exile an instant or sorcery from your graveyard with mana value less than or equal to the number of lands you control. So like if I have 3 different lands, I can play spells from a graveyard with mana value 3 or less.
and it lets you cast those spells for free. So what this deck does, essentially, is you play Avatar of Brilliance, and then you clone it with a Chronicle of Precedence. The new token comes in, and that token gets an ETB. And then you can clone it with another Chronicle of Precedence. Or you can clone it with an Alien Pledge, maybe pay some mana for the Alien Pledge modes. You then get another avatar. Then that avatar can then exile another card from your yard, and you loop it. And you basically build a big board whenever avatar drops. And then there's some other fun things. You have some blink cards as well in the deck. Um, and especially social engineering. What social engineering does is it lets you bounce a creature and make a clone of it. So you can bounce your avatar brilliance at the end of the chain to make a copy of it still, so you aren't like going down on board presence. And then it goes back to your hand, keeping it safe to then do it again another turn. So it's a really fascinating deck that does some silly things. If you end on an experimental flight, sorry, I'm catching something, I think. If you end on like an experimental flight instead of a social engineering, you can give Avatar Brilliance flying. It's good if you don't have social engineering out, or if you see like a kill turn coming up and the flying is relevant. So that's pretty cool. Um, you could also blink another creature you control in this deck, and there's a lot of really good blink targets. We'll get into that at the end of your Avatar Brilliance chains. So that's pretty neat as well. Um, Outside of that, the deck is using Selective Truth Seeker. If you're blinking Brilliance instead of making these token copies, it counts as a non-token creature entering the battlefield. In Selective Truth Seeker, whenever a non-token creature enters, surveil a card, and then if you put a non-land into your graveyard, you gain a life. So Selective Truth Seeker plus Avatar Brilliance can let you keep chaining these cards and milling cards to fill your grave to keep the chain going with Avatar even longer, which is really cool. Um, on top of that, like Selective Truth Seeker is a pretty good target for blink effects as well. Maybe not flight, but for like Stellium Pledge and no, sorry, not Social Engineering, but good for like Experimental Flight and Stellium Pledge because you then get that effect as well. And like it's not even the worst with Experimental Flight or cloning off of pledges, Alien Pledge or Chronicle, because the token still has this ability. So then if you play the Truth Seeker next turn, or like any other creature next turn, you now start surveilling 2 whenever you play a creature. So it's still not even like horrible to clone it, even if you don't get the upfront value, because the exponential value starts scaling from there. Similar deal with Whitecliff Pilgrim. Whitecliff Pilgrim's very interesting with Selective Truth Seeker. Whenever a creature entering the battlefield under your control causes an ability of a permanent you control to trigger, draw a card. If you have Selective Truth Seeker on the field and you play Whitecliff Pilgrim now draws a card on enters the battlefield. And also in the future, with Whitecliff Pilgrim out, if you have Truth Seeker out and you blink Pilgrim, draw another card. If it's opponent's turn, you haven't like activated this effect yet, blink Truth Seeker if they're trying to kill Truth Seeker. Draw another card off of Whitecliff, get your surveil. It's very fun. There is a little bit of issues, I believe, for this chain. It's nothing major, but you do have to draw before you surveil since this checks the trigger. So your effect triggers, and then Whitecliff happens, and then Whitecliff resolves, so you draw a card, and then you get the surveil. So it's like a little clunky on that front, but it's not that big of a deal. Every single creature in this deck enters the battlefield outside of Whitecliff's, so Whitecliff is very good for just helping you extend your value the longer it sticks around. Deck's also running Demographer. Nobody's like really that surprised. Demographer is just probably one of the best one drops in the format for any deck that's not aggro right now. Um, it draws cards when it enters, or it loots. It pledges. It works nicely with True Seeker. It works nicely with Whitecliff. Surveilling's very good in this deck. If you need the board, you can go for Silliman, but like getting the Surveil to dump more instants and sorceries into your graveyard for an Avatar Brilliance turn, pretty fantastic. It's not horrible to like hit with an Alien Pledge on curve either. Like turn 1 Demographer, turn 2 Alien Pledge, clone the Demographer, get another loot, get another pledge trigger. It's reasonable. Um, and yeah, um, I decided to go for Unburnt Maidens. This deck was slightly lacking in ways to kill people. Like a lot of the creatures are small, um, and I thought Unburnt Maiden was a very fantastic fit for this deck. I actually have her down here, but when she enters or attacks, she can dare, and she dares based on the number of creatures you control. If you decline, you get to make another body. So if you blink Unburnt Maiden, you're getting more tokens. Very nice. And with the way this deck works, it actually goes very wide. So having Unburnt Maidens become like 5/5, 7/7s with like First Strike and Vigilance, very good. And something else that I've noticed is that Unburnt Maiden is a card that people target with removal a lot. It pulls removal. Like, people do not like letting Unburnt Maiden stick. In the past, like, it's a must-kill card, and I don't see that being any different in this format. So being able to play Unburnt Maiden and hold up like an experimental flight or social engineering is pretty insane. It's a really good clone target. Like, cloning an Unburnt Maiden with an Alien Pledge, like, this 1/1 stat line doesn't matter. You just pay 2 mana for another Unburnt Maiden. Chronicle of Precedence, still like a good target to hit Unburnt Maiden. Speaking of Chronicle of Precedence, I think something neat is that Chronicle of Precedence can optionally mill as well. So if you see some kind of line where you need mill instead of drawing cards, it's not common, or like instead of cloning, like, it's not common, but it is an option you can do, especially on like a Brilliance turn. So that option's there. I don't know how consistent it is. Um, it gets better, I think, when you have multiple Truth Seekers out when you're doing Avatar of Brilliance shenanigans, because if you have like 2 or 3 Truth Seekers, you're going through your deck very quickly and like milling another 7 on top before blinking Avatar Brilliance and keeping the chain going with like an experimental flight from hand. You could like almost deck yourself out and just have your entire like card pool available to you. Very cool. Outside of that, let me see if there's anything I missed on the script. Also, I think the music's done. Let me refresh that just a little bit. As far as script goes, anything I missed? Bear with me for a second. I think I said most of this. This deck struggles a little bit the more your opponent can hit your cards, or can hit your graveyard in specific, because it neuters out Avatar Brilliance. So that is something to look out for, especially if they can then also like extract out your pilgrims, like kill them on demand. You're kind of sitting like waist deep and like kind of do nothing cards. So that is something. If like they're hitting your graveyard and they can consistently kill your pilgrims, you're in a very sad spot. You're basically hoping Unburnt Maiden can get you there. I forgot to talk about Cyborg real quick. Agent of Deception needs some introductions. Strong card. Ripple Effect's a card that people probably won't recognize, but it is artifact enchantment removal. And what it does as well is you can optionally choose to double an ETB. So with it can blink and then double ETBs from that creature entering. So if you do that with like an Avatar Brilliance out, you can exile a Ripple Effect from your graveyard, blink the Brilliance, it comes back, and now you can exile 2 cards from your graveyard, which then let you blink another creature you control, or like social engineering an opponent's creature to bounce it. And you also get like a double Truth Seeker proc. So that's a really cool thing that Ripple Effect does. It kind of gives you some like value positive effects on the Brilliance turn, which is something you're really looking for. So I really like this as a cyber piece and for artifact and enchantment hate. It's also instant speed. Pretty nice to hold up with like our instant list, and like some of these instants on the side. Bioclair Scorn, not much needed to be said. Great for extracting out like work safety violations from a deck or other problematic cards that are non-creatures. And then Let Them Eat Cake. You know, opponents trying to aggro you down, you bring in some cakes and just try to kill their stuff. And like Avatar of Brilliance ending on a cake is not the worst. Like, playing Avatar of Brilliance, get some random extra token copies of it, and then caking a thing is like very fine. In fact, it's probably good enough that like maybe you should be on like 2 main deck. Deck's just very tight on the list right now while I suss out what numbers are proper for like blinks versus clones versus creatures that are threats versus creatures that get value. Like, it's still in the experimental phases. As far as like other cards you could be running, there is one other cloning card in the format called Cast Reflection. I opted not to do it because it's more expensive than these other cards, but you can technically cast it despite the colorless cost, because you're trying to cast Alien Pledge and you have the colorless mana base for it. If it turns out that you need to just go even wider on Brilliance turns, you can look to go up a couple of these on top of an extra Chronicle of Precedence over maybe some of these blinks or something, and try to blow people up that way. On top of that, there's also a really funny thing you can do with Cassia. Where is she? Probably misspelled her name. Cassia. So her -2 doubles any ETBs for the rest of the turn, and this causes some pretty insane chains to happen if you like play Cassia into Avatar, because then Avatar exiles 2 cards from graveyard. You can then blink Avatar and say blink another creature like a Maiden or a True Seeker. That creature then gets a double ETB when it enters, and then Avatar gets a double ETB when it comes back off the blink, to then do it again and hit Avatar plus another creature. There's just some like really silly things that Cassia does. Sadly, you don't get to draw extra cards off of Whitecliff Pilgrim, but that's not the end of the world. I think Cassia does enough fascinating things that she deserves a solid look at for this list. Also, having something that can put out counters when your deck finally goes wide enough with Brilliance or Maidens is nice. And being able to make tokens as well helps you get some kind of permanence against decks looking to control your board. So I like Cassia a lot. I think she's actually like pretty reasonable in here. Again, I was just trying a version of this deck out that was not running any extra fluff pieces just to see what is feeling proper and what is not for like blinks versus clones versus value versus threats. And then I think last thing, you could opt for Rough Riders. I chose Unburnt Maiden because she's easy on the mana base. She's only a single pip cost. But if you really want to, you could opt for these Outriders like Opulent or Renowned, because they also have effects when they leave the battlefield, which makes you get 2 things whenever you blink them with like an Engineering or a Flight or Pledge. Renowned Rough Rider makes tokens, occasionally gets counters on things if you're wide enough. Opulent Rough Rider surveils, it can draw you cards sometimes. So yeah. There are options. Again, I just chose Unburnt Maiden because I felt like she offered the most bang for your buck for like, I'm gonna clock you for 7 damage now. But maybe this like go wide plan with Renown might be better. So yeah. Alright, last deck, and then I can finally give my voice a rest. I'm a little tired from doing this last night and then having to dump the recording. So this last deck is 4-color Get Your Phoenixes midrange. And if you can't guess what the deck is about, you are getting Phoenixes. Smolder Wings, Chainbreaker's Familiar. You are playing 4-drop Phoenixes that punch people in the face with flying and haste. And you're recurring them multiple times, you're fetching them from library, Phoenix, Phoenix, dead, dead, dead. There's some neat things that this deck does. It gets to rely on Get Your Wish a bit, which is really cool. Demographers, they loot, they draw cards, discard cards. You can get these cards in graveyard to then recast for free on later turns. It pledges you for Get Your Wish, and just a good card. Ignited Soul deals damage to player. You get to loot, again, get your guys in the graveyard. Gubernatorial also can ramp you into these guys on turn 3, or one of your really good instance orcs that we'll get into. And then, yeah, that's basically like your small curve. So, something fun with Get Your Wish is that it can fetch out Unveil the Menageries, Work Safety Violation, or Real Virtuality. Let me pull up Real Virtuality. So, something really cool is that this deck, all of the 4-cost spells that get Smolder Wings from graveyard also dig you into your library to find these Phoenixes in the first place. Real Virtuality draws 3 cards and then you can discard a card. So if you draw 3 and then discard a Smolder Wing, this is a 4 CMC smell. Your Smolder Wing comes back for that combat step to then punch face. It's a very strong turn 4 play. Or turn 3 play off of Get Your Wish if you have 4 colors among permanents. Unveil the Menagerie. It looks at 6 cards from the top of your library. Lets you pull out up to 2 with total mana value 5. Smolder Rings and Chainbreakers, 4 mana value. Demographers, 1 mana value. This looks at 6. It like digs you very deep. If you aren't hitting like Smolder Rings or Chainbreakers with Unveil, you are hitting Wildcaster Ogres almost certainly. Like, not guaranteed, but you have a very good chance at hitting Wildcaster Ogres. And Wildcasters are like Avatar of Brilliance's funny cousin that's on drugs, is the best way I'm going to put it. It exiles an instant or sorcery from your graveyard at random, and you may cast a copy without paying its mana cost. So hitting like a Get Your Wish, very nice. It lets you like, cast an Unveil from deck, a Real Virtuality from deck, a Work Safety from deck. Wildcaster hitting a Work Safety Violation from your graveyard, very strong. 5 mana, 4/3, kill a number of things. Wildcaster, like, if you play Unveil, get Wildcaster, Wildcaster then randoms into hitting Unveil, you then dig for more cards, like more Smolderwings or more Wildcasters. It keeps the chain going. That's a very strong thing. The worst thing that you can get in this deck with Wildcaster is Braze. And like, if you're hitting Braze, maybe you're sad a little bit, but Fling Tongue Kavu is a very powerful card, and you just did a Fling Tongue Kavu impression. 5 mana, 4/3 menace, kill a thing when it enters. Like, you're not that upset from like a value standpoint with Braze. It just might not be what you need at the moment. It's a very, very strong baseline for the card. So I'm very happy with how Wildcaster Ogre will play in this list. I think last thing I haven't really talked about is like Garen. There is a singleton Garen in the list as well. You can fetch it with Get Your Wish. And Garen's neat because it lets you discard 2 cards and draw that many, so it digs for Phoenixes very fast. It lets you sack a creature to bring a creature back, which you can bring back Wildcasters. Get another free spell. You can get back a Gubernatorial for treasure and a free pledge. There's some things that you can do with that. It does weird stuff with Chainbreakers where you can like blink it to then get another card from. Oh yeah, I'll talk about Chainbreakers in a second. I didn't talk about it much, but actually I'll just talk about it now. Chainbreakers, when it enters, lets you exile an instant or sorcery from your graveyard, and you may cast a copy of that until the end of your next turn. And on this instant and sorcery list, that's some pretty crazy value. Chainbreakers getting you a free Get Your Wish next turn, insane. Chainbreakers letting you unveil next turn, insane. Getting a work safety violation to hand, insane. Free Braze in a pinch, like very good. Like Chainbreakers is very good at this deck for keeping you gassed up going into the late game, especially when like the card flow starts to dry down. But anyways, yeah, Garen can let you like loop an extra Chainbreaker effect if you need a card next turn. The weakest effect in here, ironically, is the -2. It's good with specifically Wildcaster Ogre for dealing 4 to stuff, but you don't really want to be sacrificing Smolderwings out of yard or Chainbreakers out of yard, and the rest of your creatures are 1/1s. So the -2 is like not as good as it could be, and I think that like anti-synergy with the Phoenixes was the main reason I only have 1 in the list right now, but I could see you going up on these if they end up playing very well. Outside of that, your sideboard, you have Verkalocus. Verkalocus is interesting because you not only get to graveyard hit your opponent, life gain, all that fun stuff. It's a cheap card for Menagerie. You also get to trim your graveyard for Wildcaster Ogre if you so wish. If you're like, I really need to hit Unveil, I really need to hit Get Your Wish, I really need to hit Work Safety Violation, Verkalocus can exile cards that are not the cards you're trying to get, and you suddenly have a much easier time getting Wildcaster to cast the thing you want. Actually, on that note, I forgot to mention, Real Virtuality exiles itself when you cast it. So unless you are discarding it to one of your early discard cards, Real Virtuality is not in the pool for Wildcaster, which in my opinion is a good thing. I kind of like Wildcaster hitting, like, I kind of like Wildcaster doing value every single time it enters for like on the board, not on the hand. But if you do pitch a Real Virtuality, you could hit it with Wildcaster. Not the end of the world. Draw 3 cards, maybe discard a Phoenix, get a Hasted Boy. Anyways, yeah, Verkalocus is good for that Wildcaster game plan on top of just doing Graveyard Hate and gaining life. Disestablishmentarianism. You don't care about your pledge as much as some other decks do. So this gives you a tutorable activated effect on enchantment hate on top of being able to sack to destroy enchantments. It's pretty nice. It also doesn't clutter up the Wildcaster Ogre pool to where like you cast it by accident when you don't need it. Very nice. I like Disestablishmentarianism a lot in this deck. There is some stuff. I think this is better in this deck than it is in that other one with the Jeskai Incumbency. Beoclair's Scorn and Refract lock things. Again, non-creature spells. Beoclair's Scorn can just extract a problematic spell from the match so it doesn't exist anymore. And Refract can hit the creature side. You can do it at opponent's turn with Get Your Wish. I think in this deck, because you're not trying to get a bunch of different permanents like the Jeskai Incumbency list is, I do think that this sort of... we're here. I do think this sort of like game plan is a little bit more interesting and powerful on here. You can like hate out opponents' graveyard hate a lot more efficiently without sacrificing like things you need to win. So yeah, the one thing is that these cards do play kind of awkward with Wildcaster since you like exiling one of these is useless because the counter spell doesn't matter really when Wildcaster's entering. But if you side in like Lurking Verkalakis, um, like you can trim these out of graveyards, so maybe you sideboard in Verkalakis plus these counter spells and you keep in Wildcaster, or you just side out Wildcaster for these counter spells. You have options. There's more board wipes as well. Kudiata, Work Safety Violation. I don't need to talk about them too much. It's just if you need to board wipe a lot, these cards are good for doing it. You don't really care as much about your creatures dying as you do in some of these other decks that I shared, because these Phoenixes come back. And then lastly, there's a Singleton Upstage. It's a card you can fetch with Get Your Wish. I just think it's very funny to be like, turn 2, Gubernatorial, turn 3, Get Your Wish for an Upstage. You destroy like an artifact, an enchantment, and a creature. It's a silly line. It's not something that you're gonna need all the time, but there are some matchups where this is very good. So yeah. As far as like other options for this deck go, I didn't really brew other options like I did for some of these other lists. I just really wanted to make a Phoenix deck. Phoenixes are cool. I want to play Phoenixes. Phoenixes beat you in the face. Like there's maybe some things you could do like more Garens or like finding some other value walkers like Czar, but or like maybe some really good creatures they can hit with Unveil the Menagerie. It's whatever. I think that is up to the viewer. So I think that's basically everything that I had for today planned. Yeah, that's everything. That's all the decks. Nothing else. There's one more list that I made, Herver. That was very interesting. It was a red-blue turbo spell deck doing some pretty silly things, but I'm gonna let Herver have the surprise with that one on ladder, I think. Let people cry when they run into it. And yeah, I hope I helped people find decks that they may have liked. Maybe they can get game plans on their own. And I'm gonna go ahead and sign off. It was a good time. I'll catch y'all later.